Introduce myself first. Hi, I'm Marie. I'm a lawyer now at Meister, Seelig and Fine, but I'm a Kweller Prep tutor and I've worked at Kweller Prep for many years. And Frances has seen me since I was 16, 17 years old, now 10 years ago to where I am now. So she was with me for this whole journey. But I didn't originally know that I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to go to art school because I grew up drawing and painting, but I wasn't really sure that I wanted to do that as a career. And I started thinking about careers that could provide stability and be good opportunities down the line. And of course, I looked up to Frances, knowing that she was a lawyer. And I learned that, there's many different fields of law, including art law, entertainment law, and that really intrigued me because I feel like I had originally viewed law as this kind of dry field. And then when I started learning that there's so many different fields involved, I grew a little more interested in it. So when I was applying to colleges, I mainly focused on liberal arts schools because I knew that for law school, there is no strict prerequisite requirement, no set classes that you have to take in law school, in undergrad, excuse me. So I was pretty flexible about where I was applying to college. I just knew that I had to have a good GPA and be well balanced when I applied to law school. So I ultimately decided to go to NYU, and I went to NYU Gallatin, which is the School of Individualized Study at NYU. So everybody can design their own major essentially. And since I knew that I had this interest in law, while I wasn't in a, pre-law program like other universities might have, I did focus on taking law-related classes, like whatever law-related classes I could get into. And I also took art classes because that was just my interest. And so I really focused on having a really good GPA in college because that was one of the most important components to getting into law school. I graduated undergrad during COVID. Oh, can you hear? Okay. I graduated undergrad during COVID, right when the pandemic started. So my experience in some ways was a little non-traditional, but I started studying for the LSAT during that period in 2020 where everybody was quarantining. And then I also was working at Kweller Prep and a few months later, and I took law LSAT prep classes at Kweller. So I would like work during the day and then take LSAT prep classes in the evening. And that really helped me learn about the exam. And then when I was closer to actually taking the exam, I did, private tutoring sessions with a tutor to kind of focus on what I knew I needed the most help with, because I knew that the score was really, really important. So I took the LSAT in October 2020, and then I took it once and I applied to law schools, and I ultimately decided on going to Fordham. Uh, so for me, the reason why I went to Fordham was because one, I knew that I wanted to stay in New York for law school because I knew that I eventually wanted to practice in New York. And so it was going to be the best idea for me to stay in the state that I wanted to practice in. Also, my family is here, so I didn't want to go too far from them for law school. I also chose Fordham because they have a very large alumni network, and they also have a very strong focus on intellectual property law. And there were a lot of interesting classes and clubs and activities that I knew I wanted to look into because I was interested in doing something with entertainment, media, intellectual property, things like that. So I started law school in fall 2021, and I graduated in last year, May 2024, so almost a year ago now. And I've been working full time as an attorney at a mid-sized law firm, and I'm in the city location, and I'm in the intellectual property group doing mainly trademark and copyright work. Frances, is there anything else specific I should discuss about the process?
Yeah, just if you could just go through like what classes you took, like kind of like walk us through the A to Z of what you got yourself into.
Like in law school?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, sure. So in most law school, I would say probably all law schools, your first year, it's called your 1L year. Um, essentially get put into, it's called like a section. Some law schools call it something different, but essentially you're placed in a cohort with a group of people that you will take all of your classes with for the first year of law school. And so when you're entering into law school, at least for me, I didn't have any lawyers in my family. Like I knew some people who were lawyers, but I didn't really grow up with lawyers, so I didn't know what to expect from law school, and I didn't have legal experience going into law school, so I didn't know what I was walking into. But you're placed in this cohort, and all of your classes are assigned to you because for the bar is going to feature a set number of subjects, and so your first year of law school is curated for you to take like a lot of the subjects that are going to be on the bar after you graduate law school. So when I was a 1L, I took, constitutional law. That's one of the main classes, contracts, civil procedure. Fordham also required us to take legislation and regulation. So classes like that. And so your entire first year, your schedule is made for you and you don't have to worry about, picking classes, who your professors are going to be, things like that. So your first year of law school, I'm sure you've probably heard it's the considered to be the most difficult year because your grades are really, really important. So generally in most law schools, you don't really do extracurricular activities your first year of law school because you're really supposed to focus on your classes and gaining an understanding of these core subjects. Then kind of when the year is starting to end, once you hit the spring semester, most students start trying out for things like journals and competition teams. So a journal is kind of like a school newspaper, and each law school has a few of them, and it's considered very prestigious to be on a journal. And it looks good, down the line when you're applying for a job if you were able to say, I was on this journal or this newspaper. Then there's also competition teams, which is kind of like moot court or a debate team. So all law schools have a few of those, and it's also considered very good to be on one of those. But you generally, at least at Fordham and at most schools that I know of, you can't really participate in things like that until you're already done with your first year or you're nearing the end of your first year because you're supposed to really be focusing on your academics. So when the end of the year comes, most people do essentially try out for these things. So I tried out for the Dispute Resolution Society, which was instead of like litigation where you're arguing in court, and it feels very adversarial. This group focused more on negotiations, mediations, things like that, where you're kind of talking in a group to try to find a resolution, and it's considered a lot friendlier. So I made that team at Fordham because I felt like that was something that interested me. I knew about myself that I probably didn't want to argue in a courtroom. So for me, the team at Fordham that intrigued me was the one that was less adversarial, and I really liked that. And then for the journals, I knew that I was interested in Fordham's intellectual property journal because I wanted to do intellectual property law, like copyright, trademark, work with artists, things like that. So you do the tryout for the moot court or the dispute resolution society. And for us, what that entailed was that you are given a fact pattern scenario like 24 hours before you are supposed to go in front of the people that you are trying out for, and you only get one side of the story. You're given a client whose interests you have to represent, and you're told, oh, these are the things that are non-negotiable, and these are the things that maybe, they can kind of lean away from. And it's all about learning like what is really non-negotiable for the client and where can kind of let things go. And then the other person, whoever you're going to be paired up against, they have their own set of facts and their own scenario, and part of it is going to conflict with yours. So when you're trying out, you get put in a room with some people, and they want to see how organically you and this random other person are going to negotiate with one another. And so that was what the tryout process looked like for me. It was a 2-day tryout. So first day, everybody who showed up to the tryout did this. Then they decide who makes it to the next round. And then the second day, they narrowed down even further from there. So that was how I got onto that team. Then for the journal, the way that the process works, if you want to try for a journal, in Fordham at least, our school automatically entered every student into it's called the writing competition, because we were all encouraged to try out for the journal. So we got a few articles to read and we had to edit them with and fix the citations, because there's very specific legal citations that you learn about, in your first year writing class. We also had to write a very short article based on some sources that they provided for us so they could see our writing style. So you do that after your first year is over, after you've taken your finals, and then you find out, if you made it to the journal or not. After your first year of law school, mostly everybody has a 1L internship or a job after the first year of law school. You generally apply for that sometime in the fall, winter break, or in the spring to see where you're going to work in the summer. A lot of people choose to work at a court. They get experience working for a judge. I ended up working at a small law firm, just because I wanted to be at a law firm, and I got very lucky that I was placed. I got selected for this. And so I was at a small law firm the summer after my first year. It focused on commercial litigation and matrimonial law, and I mainly worked with the commercial litigation group. And my group was maybe 5 people, so very small, but that was also a good opportunity for me, because since it was so small, I got a lot of direct training and I got a lot of experience that maybe if I was in a bigger place, I wouldn't have been doing as hands-on work as I was here. So I felt like I learned a lot about litigation. And even though my entire first year I had been saying, no litigation, no litigation, I never want to do this. After my summer at this firm, I thought, oh, maybe I can see myself doing litigation someday. It's really not that bad. Because I pictured it in my head as just arguing in front of a judge, but there was a lot of legal research involved, which I liked, drafting different arguments, and I like to write, so I also enjoyed that. And so I ended up liking it more than I thought I would. So then when you're starting your second year of law school, you're finally able to pick your classes. Every school has different requirements. Like there are certain prerequisites that can go past the first year. So the first year is the same across the board. At every school, you're going to take all the same core classes, but then some schools are going to have maybe extra requirements. So for example, I know at St. John's Law School, they require all of their students to take evidence because that's a subject on the bar. But at Fordham, that's not a required class, but most people choose to take it because they know that it's going to be on the bar. So when I finally had the opportunity to choose which classes I wanted to take, I was looking online to see, oh, what subjects are tested on the bar. Maybe I can take a class in law school earlier so that I can get some exposure to this subject, and then I'm not learning it for the first time ever when I start studying for the bar. So that's how I try to divide my schedule, and some of my friends did that as well, where we try to take, one bar prep class, so to speak, a class that was just for our enjoyment, like an elective that we liked, something that fit into Fordham's specific requirements, and then a fourth class, if whichever way we wanted to go after that. Like you could do another bar class, another class that's an elective. Um, I knew that I was interested in intellectual property law still, and Fordham at least has certain concentrations that you can do, almost like majors, and you can only start looking into that after your first year. And so they had an intellectual property law focused one, and I knew I wanted to do it, so I looked into what classes would qualify to basically complete this major in the law school. So I ended up taking a few classes that were helpful for the bar, but unfortunately I didn't take all the classes that were going to be on the bar. That would have been a good idea to do. But later on, as law school went on, I thought, oh, if I don't get into this class now, it's okay. I can learn it for the bar. And it did make it a little harder down the line, but it was fine in the end. But anyway, so in your second year is considered, it's better than the first year for sure, because now you're in classes that you chose for yourself. You have these extracurricular activities. There's not as much stress as the first year. Um, so let me backtrack actually. So then the next most important step is your job that you would have the summer after your second year of law school. Because usually what happens is the job after your first year, that's just to gain general experience. Everybody knows that you're coming into it after your first year of law school and that you don't really know anything. You just had 1 year of law school, you learned some of the core subjects, but it doesn't mean that you would be able to practice or anything. So the job after your first year of law school, it's just good experience. Now, the job or the internship that you have after your second year of law school, if you do well there, most likely that would be where you would go after law school as your full-time career. So that's considered very important. And you apply for that pretty early as well. So that's why your grades, your first year of law school, are very important because you use those grades when you're applying for jobs after your second year of law school. The application process starts pretty early. And like your law school walks you through the timeline very well. So thankfully for all of us who didn't know what was going on when we started law school, we were told when all the timelines would start. So, oh, hi Jeff. Jeff was my tutor for LSAT.
Yay! So
Yeah,
Marie, keep going for a few minutes and Jeff is
sure.
going to take over in like 3 minutes. Okay, go ahead.
So you use your first year law school grades to apply after um, for your job after your second year of law school that will hopefully become your full-time position. And that process, it starts in the summer of your first year, but everybody's process is a little bit different. It can extend into the fall of your second year. It really depends on where you go, what kind of job you're looking for. I knew that I wanted to go to a more mid-sized firm, maybe not a giant firm, and those started hiring for the following summer a little bit later in the year. So the timeline for me was that the job where I'm at now, I applied in October of my second year, October 2022. I interviewed in January 2023, and I got the offer in February 2023, and then I worked there in the summer after my second year from June or May 2023 through August 2023. But some people had a different timeline. They got hired earlier and they ended their job earlier. They got hired later and they worked at slightly different times. So after my second year, I worked at my current firm. And the way that our summer program was designed was we were not put in any specific group, which was nice. We got work from partners from all different departments. We were able to go to court with some of the partners, attend internal calls and meetings, attend trial prep, just to give us a overarching view of how the firm works. And so the firm knew that I wanted to do intellectual property, but they didn't want to only give me work in that department. They wanted me to be a little more well-rounded over the summer. And then when I got my offer, it was a general offer. So I was told that, I was offered a position at the end of my program, but they said that they would let me know which group I was going in to later, which is generally how it works at firms because they want to know what the need is going to be. And they don't always know that right away, right? They hire you a year before you start full time, so they don't always know exactly which group needs people until closer to when your start date is. So I went into my third year of law school, and that's considered to be the easiest year because most people ideally start that year knowing that they have a job for after they graduate law school. Ideally, you would have finished your requirements at your law school of the classes you're supposed to take, so you can take electives that interest you. Fordham offered a bar prep course, so I wanted to start early, and I took the class that was offered through Fordham. And then I picked the bar prep program that I was interested in and that my firm provided. And I started that course right after I graduated law school. And I spent, the summer studying. And I took the bar in July 2024 and thankfully passed. And I've been working full time since September. So
Oh my
that's
gosh, I love it, Marie. That's so awesome. Everyone, we're so proud of you. We're so impressed with you. And
cool.
from one lawyer from another, you are an ESQ. I love it. Marie shared her graduation photos with us. Super fun. So, Marie didn't know this, but we invited her tutor here.
Mhm.
Jeff is actually like everyone's tutor. So I feel like he's tutored everyone in Queens at some point and beyond. So I'm going to add Jeff to the spotlight if it's okay. Everyone, let's say thank you to Marie. She gave us a really good amount of her time and she walked us through so much. And Jeff is going to walk us through the mechanics of the law school application, the LSAT, what we're getting ourselves into. Everyone, let's type thank you to Marie in the chat box. Thank you, Marie. Thank you so much. I'm writing thank you in the chat. Okay. Thank you, Marie. It's an honor. I
Sure.
can't believe it. From high school to
Now
Esquire. Amazing.
I've been at
So,
Kweller.
Jeff, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. So, Jeff is going to take over and he'll go through the mechanics of the application. Okay, go ahead, Jeff. The spotlight is all yours.
How you all doing? I'm Jeff, even though it's a Zoom user. Someday I'll figure out how to change that. So yeah, am not just a tutor for the LSAT. I also help people with their applications to get into law school. So we'll just sort of talk about the components of that. And we'll talk about the LSAT a little bit. If you don't already know, the what you need to get into law school is a degree of some kind, not a law degree. Just you can get one of the beautiful things about a law school is that you can have been a philosophy major, you could be some kind of science major, you could be a theater major, and you could apply to law school with that. And there's a good chance you'll get in somewhere. Um, the other aspects of getting into law school in the first place, there's an application, of course. It's kind of similar to the college applications, although there is no common app like with college. Every law school potentially has their own application. They're usually very similar, but they all potentially have little differences, something to be aware of. Within that application, most of it is pretty straightforward. You fill out, it's a form that you would fill out for each school. But in addition, you would be submitting a personal statement like with college, although it's different than the college kind of personal statement. Could potentially be very different. And there might be some other optional statements that they will offer to you in that application. They might ask you to answer some kind of moral question. They might ask, I think Georgetown University, not sure if they're still doing it, but for a while they were, one of the optional statements was submit a top 10 list. It's sort of an attempt to see what kind of different personalities are out there. In addition to the statements and the application, this has changed over the last several years. It used to be that you would take the LSAT. The LSAT was the law school admissions test. Everybody took it. It was basically required by all schools. That has changed. The LSAT is still probably the most common test that people take, but it is also possible to get into law school if you take the GRE, which is significantly different from the LSAT in certain ways. The GRE involves math. It involves a little more sort of different types of questions in the verbal section. If you don't like math, which a lot of people that want to go to law school don't, the LSAT might be the test for you. Now, in terms of this, what the schools accept, pretty much, I don't know if there are any schools left that don't accept the GRE. Certainly all schools will take the LSAT. That's one of the reasons that we're still pretty busy in the LSAT tutoring world. It's also the LSAT is a test that we have pretty good numbers in terms of what kinds of numbers students are getting into certain schools with in terms of the score. Every school publishes their LSAT medians and 75th percentiles, 25th percentiles. I think schools are starting to do the GRE to publish the statistics on the GRE scores, but for years that wasn't the case. So we didn't know like what kind of score you would need on the GRE to get into any particular school. So, and there are actually some schools now, not that many, that don't require a standardized test at all. Very few. You probably want to take one of the standardized tests. I pulled up a practice test, an LSAT test. Give you an idea what we're talking about here. Because this is definitely by far the most commonly taken test. And schools have a good understanding of what the scores on this test mean. So as of now, there are two different types of sections on the LSAT. One is called logical reasoning, which is what I have open. The other one is called reading comp, which is self-explanatory. You've done reading comp for most of your lives. You're going to be doing way more reading comp if you go to law school, and so they include reading comp as part of the LSAT. So that's pretty self-explanatory. There are some tricks of the trade in terms of getting better at reading comp, but by and large, you know what it is, you know how to do it. We can talk about ways to get better at it, but it's not mysterious. So the big section that's mysterious, and by the way, there's 3 sections that count when you take the LSAT. 2 logical reasoning sections, 1 reading comp, and then there's going to be an extra experimental section that doesn't count. One of the other 2. So this section, the logical reasoning section, there's a lot to learn, a lot to understand about there's many question types is really the point. They all pretty much look like this, like you see on this page. So you get a paragraph, and then they'll ask you a question about the paragraph or not. I'll explain that in a second. If you look at number 1 over here, this one is simply asking you to identify the conclusion of the argument. And not every paragraph has an argument, but they're telling you there's an argument. They're asking you to find the conclusion. Look at number 2. This is about panthers in Florida. Look at the question. If the statements above are true, which of the following must also be true? This is called a must be true question. There's basically around 13 or 14 question types, depending on who you ask. So there's really a lot to learn. Some question types are more voluminous than others. Really, like there's 4 that are really the most important, but there's really a lot to know. Look at number 3. This one is a little different. The political scientist's argument proceeds by. So they're sort of asking you, like, how are they making the argument? And look at some of these answers. Like A, undermining a view by showing that its general acceptance would lead to undesirable consequences. Very sort of abstract language. They're not being very specific to the argument. They're just asking in general, what are they doing? Number 4 would be what we call a weakened question. One of the most common types of questions, the weakened question. What will be the strongest counter to the physician's argument? Number 5, the argument is flawed in that it fails to consider the possibility that. Some would call this a flaw question, some would call this a weakened question. You don't need to worry about it right now. But you see the way they word the question. The argument's flawed because what is it doing? Or what is it failing to do? Number 7, another flaw question. Flaw questions are among the most common. The reasoning the argument is flawed in that the argument does what? And this is very similar to the method of reasoning question that I showed you before. Basically, how did the argument proceed? What's the argumentative strategy? This is very similar in that it's the right answer is going to be an argumentative strategy that's being used, but it's a flawed argumentative strategy. And there are a lot of types of flaws that we see on this test. Certain ones appear more than others, and that's something you can absolutely learn and get better at. Number 6 is yet another question type. I mean, we've looked. I've showed you 7 questions, and basically we've seen 7 different question types. Which of the following, if true, most helps to resolve the apparent discrepancy described above? That in that kind of a question, there's going to be apparently conflicting information in the paragraph, and we're looking for an answer that helps to allow those two competing facts to be true at the same time. That's a weekend question. Number 9 is a question that drives a lot of people crazy. It's called a parallel reasoning question. In this case, a parallel flaw question, where you are trying to find the answer that has the same sort of logical structure as the argument in the original paragraph. And when it's a parallel flaw question, like this one is, the flawed reasoning that they mentioned, the main thing we're looking for is to match the flaw. Another weekend question, number 10. Number 11 is yet another type of question, which of the following, if assumed, enables the conclusion to be properly drawn. This is a somewhat complicated question. We're looking for the answer that, if true, makes the conclusion correct. Number 13 is another weekend question. Number 12 is a type of a strengthened question. So you can see there's a lot going on in logic reasoning. A million question types. And we haven't even seen one of the most common areas, number 15, the last one I wanted to show you. Which of the following is an assumption on which the argument depends? If we have more time, I would start asking questions about what does that even mean? What do you think it means? What's going to make the right answer right? It's one of the most common question types, and it's also potentially one of the hardest question types. Any question type can be made easy or hard. This question, an assumption on which the argument depends, you need to have a good understanding as to what that even means and what's going to make the right answer right. And a lot of wrong answers are very attractive. They're very good at making wrong answers look attractive. So that is a quick snapshot of the logical reasoning section of the LSAT. I'll show you briefly one of the logical reasoning sections. We'll get there. I guess it's the last section of this one. Okay. So as you can see, long passage, and then there are going to be anywhere from 5 to 8 questions on each, and it's just like SAT reading comp, but much harder. I mean, that's all I can tell you. One of the differences between this and the SAT, the answer, the information that helps us to answer questions in reading comp can be from anywhere in the passage. It's not like in the SAT where they generally do things in sort of the order of the passage. That's not true here. They are super good at making wrong answers look attractive. And so much of it comes down to just sort of individual word analysis in logical reasoning and in reading comp as well. So that's really the goal, is to be able to really catch the words that make answers right or wrong. Sometimes the individual words they're not the most important words of like the sentence of the answer, but we can't ignore any words. That's what it looks like. The GRE is a little tougher to get. I don't tutor the GRE, so I don't have any practice tests, and they're hard to get a hold of. So you can certainly take a quick look if you're good at math and you want to take a test with math to get into law school, you might consider the GRE. Now, in terms of the other main part of the application is the personal statement, which I mentioned before. Personal statement for law school, it goes hand in hand with something I mentioned before, which is that you can major in anything in college. It doesn't matter what you did in college and still apply to law school. Law schools tend to like diversity in their student body. They're looking they don't want everyone to be like, I love law so much and I've always wanted to be a lawyer since I was 5 years old. They are looking for interesting people that have interesting experiences, people that have interesting academic backgrounds. And I've helped people get into law school with all kinds of majors that you can, anything you can think of. They law schools, Marie before mentioned wanting to do intellectual property. Intellectual property is one of those areas that it covers a lot of different types of subject matter, but that includes a lot of times engineers and people that have taken science classes. I have a personal statement that I'm going to share with you from someone who became a scientific researcher and then ended up gravitating towards law school because of a forum that she went to, and she got very, very intrigued by it. So when it comes to personal statements, it's not just why do you want to go to law school or why do you want to be a lawyer. Some of the best personal statements have nothing to do with wanting to be a lawyer, although many of them end up being about that because if you're implying you're interested in going to law school. But as I said, law schools are looking for interesting people. They want as much diversity as they can get in their class. So personal statements can run the gamut. I worked on a personal statement with a student once who was a philosophy major, and I just sort of talked to him for a while. We're trying to figure out what to write about for a statement. And the previous summer, it turns out he had worked at P.F. Chang's in a mall somewhere, I think down in the Washington area. And he was talking to me about, he was basically telling me about how he viewed the whole experience from the point of view of his favorite philosophers. And he was like, oh, this person was just like this person. I don't even remember the philosopher names, but he was sort of related all these different people that he worked with in some way to these philosophers, and he thought of the restaurant as like a microcosm of society as a whole, and that kind of thing. It was a really fun statement to read. Law schools love that. He got into Georgetown, a great school, top 15 school. So that's a really great example of how when you try to write a personal statement, you're not necessarily, don't think of it in terms of what do they want to hear. They want to see what you got. The personal statement is your opportunity to show law schools something that is not necessarily apparent from your resume or your transcript. And all we're looking for is something that would help them to think that they should want to have you in their incoming class. So I'm going to show you. One of the more interesting ones. I hope it's big enough. Hope you can all see it. I'll make it bigger. So maybe read the first paragraph. So this first paragraph. You whenever possible, you want to sort of grab the reader as much as you can, get them interested in reading more. You know, these admissions officers, when it's admission season, they have hundreds of these things on their desk or in their computer, and it's a lot of work for them, and they can zone out kind of easily. So we want to try to catch their attention. I think the first sentence does a pretty good job of that. But notice also what else happened in this paragraph. Becoming a lawyer never once crossed my mind. I didn't think I had what it took to be an attorney. Arrogance and pig-headedness. Now, some might think there's a little bit of a risk there where you're basically saying to law school, yeah, I understand that to go to law school, I need to be stubborn and obnoxious, basically. But my personal statement many, many years ago had a bit of that, this idea of like, I never wanted to go to law school. And then I explained how I ended up coming around to that, which is a potentially very successful type of statement. So that's how this started. And then she explained her journey, her intellectual journey, and how she ended up getting interested in law. And with, you know, she needed help with some editing, but you know, generally she had a great story to tell, and I just helped her say it, you know, in an effective way, really. And she ended up being she was the scientific researcher, and she went to this conference, and she just got sucked in and got interested to hear what the lawyer said, and ended up eventually coming around to law school. Let me show you another one. It's a little different. Okay. So this one, in this one, the student was telling the story of how she helped create this group at St. John's University called I think it was SJU Views. She had been helping to facilitate a sort of discussion about a very sort of explosive matter about abortion. And there was pro-life students and pro-choice students talking, debating, and thankfully not coming to blows. And this student was taken by the fact that she saw that pro-choice and pro-life students were able to actually talk in a civil way and actually spend some time together, and she sort of started with that and ended up helping to create this group on at St. John's. What she did in the beginning was in as you can see, like she gives this little vignette about what was going on in the classroom about this discussion of abortion. But then she circled back to give a little bit of her own background, to show where she was coming from. And she was exposed to conservative values, but her views were not necessarily in line with her community. And this was like a very sort of thoughtful piece about her personal development intellectually. And that's the kind of thing that law schools love to see, this idea of personal growth, that you're able to look back on your life and sort of be able to talk about what has shaped you, what has what has made you the person you are, what has brought you to this day where you're applying for law school. It wasn't really this statement was not about law. It was not about going to law school. In fact, I don't think anywhere in this statement does she even mention law. It was all about this idea of being able to have intellectual discussions with people maybe with different views, which is a real important idea. If you're going to have diversity in your law school class, you're going to have people with different points of view. So that's an example of that. Then there really are an unlimited number of ways to write a personal statement. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to apply to law school, the sky's the limit when it comes to the personal statement. Personal statement can make a huge difference in a law school application. It is one of the most important parts of the law school application. So you have the LSAT or the GRE. You have the application itself, which is really a form to fill out. You'd have a resume. Have someone help you with the resume if possible, because a law school resume, if you're applying to law school, is different from when you're applying for a job. Law school resume should include more things than a job resume. You want to give them as full a picture that you can of yourself. So that's part of the application, is submitting the resume. Of course, the personal statement, any optional statements, and then of course the LSAT that I mentioned before, and I mean that's basically, those are the components of law school application. Some people ask if there are interviews for law school, part of law school application, and the answer to that is generally no. Most schools do not offer interviews. There are some exceptions. Georgetown Law offers interviews with their alumni network. There are other schools that do it. I think Northwestern, I believe, offers it. I believe Vanderbilt, I think, does. And last I heard, Harvard would contact some students for interviews if they were a little bit on the fence with that student. But most schools, by and large, do not offer interviews. That's pretty much all I got. Are you there, Francis? No. Let me get Francis. But I hope you've enjoyed my little chat. I hope you've been paying attention because I hope it was interesting enough to pay attention.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm interrupting just to
Good.
say that I'm very happy that you've covered so much ground. Everyone say thank you to Jeff for this great webinar. Thank you. Everybody type a thank you to Jeff. You did a great job, Jeff. I'm so happy to share that you are the world tutor. Everyone I know has gone to you. You've become quite famous with Kweller Prep. You realize that, right? Everyone. You don't even need a last name. You're just Jeff Elsat. Isn't
Glad to
that
hear that.
funny?
Thanks so
Quite
much.
the notoriety. You see how you see that now? It's like Jeff Kweller Prep, Jeff Kweller Prep something. Isn't that so funny? You're always here. I'm very happy to share. Thank you. You were even Marie's tutor. You believe that? Everyone. Jeff has the world tutor, world renowned. Okay. He
Thanks so
tutored
much
the
for that.
tutor. Marie was a tutor at Kweller. Jeff tutored the tutor. Isn't that funny? Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for a wonderful,
My pleasure.
spectacular webinar. You're looking good, Jeff. Nice and spiffy. But you need a blue blazer. You need to match.
Well, it is blue. It's just dark blue. So
We need to get you a nice, bright, royal blue one. All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much.
take care.
Enjoy. Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.